You ever hear something so wild, so unexpectedly real that you question your own judgment for a second? Like, wait, did that really just happen? That's exactly what crossed my mind when I heard his story. This isn't a story about a cheap affair or some meaningless fling. No. This is about a moment that spiraled into something raw, revealing, and deeply human. It's about betrayal, yes, but also about ego, vulnerability, the longing for validation, and how sometimes what starts as a joke ends up changing everything. Let's go back to the beginning. It started like most things do. Ordinary. He was a married man, a hard-working contractor who had his own small business, did well enough, and stayed mostly under the radar. Good. With his hands, respected in the neighborhood, a guy you'd trust to fix your roof or build a deck without cutting corners. His wife, Emily, worked in finance. Sharp. Put together. She had a no-nonsense way of speaking, like someone who didn't waste time with fluff. They'd been married for 6 years. No kids yet. And on the surface, things seemed steady. But like with many marriages, there was distance. Not loud, not dramatic. Just that kind of emotional erosion that happens over time when two people live beside each other instead of with each other. They shared meals, shared a home, but intimacy had faded. She'd often be glued to her laptop late at night, spreadsheets open, answering emails. He'd retreat to the garage, fixing up old tools, restoring antique furniture, things that didn't talk back or make him feel invisible. And then came her. Her name was Tessa. She lived 2 streets down, recently divorced, early 40s, confident, unapologetically expressive. She hired him to do some renovation work on her backyard, a new pergola, some stonework, and a fire pit. Simple stuff. He was glad to take the job, needed the work. What he didn't expect was how quickly their conversations turned effortless. It wasn't flirty. Not at first. It was curious, engaged. She asked questions, not just about the project, but about him, how long he'd been married. If he loved what he did, what made him start his own business. When was the last time someone really looked him in the eyes and asked him what he wanted? That last one hit him hard, because he couldn't remember. She'd come outside with coffee while he worked, ask about his day, laugh at his stories, compliment his craftsmanship. She noticed things his wife hadn't commented on in years. There was one afternoon, hot and humid, when he took off his shirt to wipe the sweat from his brow. Tessa looked up from her glass of lemonade, smiled, and said, "Well now, that's a real tool at work." She laughed as she said it, but the air shifted. He chuckled, shrugged it off, but something changed that day. Not physically, not yet. But mentally. The spark had been lit. From that point on, things got more charged. The jokes got closer to the line, the glances lingered longer than they should have. She started making more intentional comments about his arms, his work ethic, how men don't build like this anymore. But it wasn't just her. He responded. He played into it, brought her favorite coffee in the morning, stayed later, then needed to clean up. Told stories about his past that were more personal than professional. And every time he went home to Emily, he felt the contrast. The cold kitchen, the silence, the way she barely looked up from her screen to say, hello. He wasn't looking to cheat, not consciously. But there was something intoxicating about being seen again, appreciated, respected not just for what he did, but for who he was. Until one Friday evening, when the line was crossed. It was supposed to be the last day on Tessa's project. The fire pit was finished. The lighting was perfect. The entire backyard looked like something out of a magazine. She insisted he stay for a drink. Just one, to celebrate. He agreed. One drink became 2. The music was soft, nostalgic, the kind that brings back memories of summer nights and simpler times. She leaned in closer. Her perfume was subtle but intoxicating. She said, "You know, I think this is the first time in a long time I've felt safe. And seen." He said nothing at first, then quietly replied, "Yeah, I know what you mean." She stood up, walked over to him slowly, and said, "You fix everything around you. What do you do when it's you that needs fixing?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because the kiss came next, and he didn't pull away. What followed wasn't reckless. It was deliberate, slow, like two people convincing themselves that this was justified, that this moment was allowed because of all the ones they'd been denied before. But when it was over, he didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow, like he'd touched something forbidden that didn't bring joy, just silence. He didn't sleep that night. Went home to Emily, sat in the car for almost an hour before stepping inside. She was asleep, curled up on the couch. Her laptop was closed for once. He looked at her and realized something that shattered him. He hadn't even tried. Not really. He let distance grow without fighting it. He let himself be seen by someone else before he dared ask his own wife to look at him again, so he told her. The next morning, he sat her down, took a deep breath, and confessed everything. Not just the act, but the reasons, the distance, the emotional starvation, the way he'd let their marriage drift without anchoring it. She didn't cry, not right away. She stared at him, quietly, like she was processing grief she didn't know she carried. When she finally spoke, all she said was, "I knew something was wrong. I just thought we'd get back to us, eventually." But eventually never came. They went to counseling. It wasn't easy. Nothing about repairing trust is. But they tried. He stopped working weekends. She started closing the laptop at 6 p.m. They started having dinner together again, even if it was just takeout on the couch. They tried to remember what it felt like to be partners, not just cohabitants. As for Tessa, she moved away a few months later, said she needed a fresh start. She never contacted him again. No drama, no accusations, just distance. And he never blamed her, because it was never really about her. She was the mirror, the catalyst, but the fracture had always been there. What surprised him most was how the shame didn't come from what he did, but from how long he allowed himself to go unseen before doing something about it. In the end, it wasn't about infidelity. It was about neglect, emotional neglect, and how quiet it creeps in until one day you mistake attention for affection. So what's the takeaway? It's not just about betrayal. It's about paying attention to the slow erosion that happens when two people stop checking in. When pride, routine, or emotional laziness takes over and you start to feel like roommates rather than lovers. He put his big tool to the test, but not the one people think. Not just the physical, but the emotional one. His integrity, his accountability, his courage to admit where he failed, and to rebuild what was broken. Sometimes, the most shocking confessions aren't about the affair itself. They're about the quiet, everyday choices that lead you there. The moments you ignore, the needs you dismiss, the conversations you postpone. This isn't just his story. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that intimacy isn't built in grand gestures, but in the daily act of choosing each other, seeing each other, every single day. And if you stop choosing, someone else just might. Time does strange things after a betrayal. It stretches. Moments that used to pass without thought now echo. Every routine becomes a test. Making coffee, folding laundry, brushing past each other in the hallway. It's all different now. In the weeks that followed his confession, silence became their third roommate. Not hostile, just heavy. They were polite, cordial, almost like co-workers handling a delicate project that neither of them asked for. He wanted to fix it, desperately, but he knew better than to rush her healing. Trust doesn't come back with words. It shows up in patterns, in consistency, in patience. Emily, to her credit, didn't throw it in his face every day. She didn't weaponize his mistake. But she did set boundaries. She asked hard questions, ones he had to answer without defensiveness. Questions like, when did you first feel unloved? And why didn't you come to me instead of her? he didn't have tidy answers. Because the truth is, he didn't even know he was slipping away. That's the scariest part. You don't always see it happening until it's already done. He told her honestly, I didn't feel like I mattered anymore, and instead of fighting for you to see me, I let someone else fill that space. That admission, that humility, mattered more than any apology. They didn't jump back into love. That would have been too easy and unrealistic. No, they began again. Not from where they left off, but from something brand new. They started doing things they hadn't done in years. Long walks, cooking together, even if the food was terrible. Laughing, not the shallow kind, the deep kind, the kind that comes from knowing someone's flaws and still choosing to stand beside them. He learned to listen differently, not just with his ears, but with intention. When she spoke about her work, he asked follow-up questions. He started noticing the way her voice changed when she was excited about a new deal, the way her forehead creased when she was tired. She, in turn, allowed herself to be vulnerable again, to talk about how lonely she had been too, how she'd buried herself in work not because she didn't love him, but because she didn't know how to say she missed the version of him that used to light up when she walked into a room. In therapy, they explored the dynamics that brought them here, their communication styles, their unmet emotional needs, their love languages. Turns out she needed words of affirmation, he needed physical closeness, and both had been waiting for the other to go first. It wasn't the affair that ultimately broke them, it was the years of silence before it. The nights of laying inches apart but emotionally miles away. The smiles that never reached the eyes. The half-finished conversations that ended in, never mind. What surprised them most was how much intimacy returned when they simply started. Being present again. Not in grand cinematic ways, but in real, human ways. Holding hands in the car, making eye contact during breakfast, sending each other articles or videos that made them laugh. One night, months into their slow reconciliation, she looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "You know, I still don't trust you completely, but I believe you're trying, and that means something." And that's when he realized something profound. Being loved is a gift. But being forgiven? That's sacred. He knew he didn't deserve instant redemption, but he also knew he couldn't let shame become his identity, so he let the guilt shape him, not destroy him. Looking back, that infamous phrase, he put his big tool to the test, wasn't just about temptation. It was about his character, his patience, his willingness to confront his flaws, not just excuse them. And let's be honest, every man has a moment in life where he's tested, not just by temptation, but by life's emotional complexity, by whether he chooses easy attention over hard-earned connection, by whether he faces discomfort or avoids it until it becomes someone else's burden. His tool, if you really want to call it that, wasn't his body, it was his emotional maturity. His willingness to unlearn old patterns and build something that couldn't be shaken by one moment of weakness. This story isn't just about a man who made a mistake. It's about the kind of man he became afterward. Because infidelity, as painful as it is, doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a truth that's been buried for too long. So if you're watching this thinking, that could have been me, or maybe, that is me, let this story be your mirror. Are you waiting to be seen? Or are you making the effort to be known? Are you drifting quietly in your relationship, assuming it'll fix itself one day? Or are you willing to say the hard things now, to speak before the silence grows too loud to ignore? This isn't a scandal. It's a confession. Not for gossip, but for growth. Because real relationships aren't perfect. They're built, broken, and, if both people are brave, rebuilt again. And if you've been lucky enough to be forgiven, don't waste that chance. Don't let the story end at the mistake. Let it begin with the man you become next.